Speaking Human.
Today on Speaking Human, we spin our thoughts on the marketing power of cover art and hit play on our favorite album covers of all time.
Speaking Human.
Welcome to Speaking Human, where we simplify the world of marketing for humans. I'm Shad Conley, and with me is my co-host, Patrick Jebber.
What's rockin', Shad?
Great choice of words, Patrick.
I just figured, could be rap.
What's rapping? That's what a lot of cool, hip, young people say, I think. What you rapping about over there?
What's all the jazz about, Shad?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so obviously we're talking about music today, kind of, right?
A little bit. Indirectly. Music and art. Art and music. I would say marketing with a musical flavor or music with a marketing flavor.
I like it.
So to be a little clearer for people out there, like a great song, you got to get the build up. Let's get to the chorus here. And the chorus is, today we're talking about album covers that are on the front of those musical CDs we once bought, records people once bought, cassettes people once bought, and now these digital files you buy. They got this image slapped in front of them that you stare at before you click buy. So how are they selling bands and albums, Patrick? How do they make a difference? Do they make a difference? What do you think?
I think album covers are a lot like a company's marketing literature, bringing it back to business, right? Let's say you have a brochure that promotes life insurance products or maybe technology services that you offer. The cover of your brochure could be the difference between enticing a person to open it and learn more or tossing it in the trash. And in an album cover's case, it's listening to that music that's contained within or moving on to an album that does catch their eye. So essentially, it's like any marketing material that's ever been created, right?
Definitely. I think that's a good way to think about it. Along the same lines, but a little bit of a different light. I kind of thought about it as like product packaging. You're shopping in the grocery store and looking down the aisles and you see all these different things. How those products are packaged can mean the difference between buying or not buying, right?
Yeah, for sure. That's so true because you think about it. You go down the aisle and something catches your eye. Usually it's something, generally speaking, well designed, tend to catch your eye a little bit better than ones that aren't.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah. There are two components, because there's the grab your eye thing. There's the, I'm kind of walking down or flipping through or scrolling through things and you see this thing and you're like, okay, my eyes are immediately drawn to that. That's like one immediate effect. But there's also the product packaging. If you're kind of interested in something and then you start analyzing it, can it nudge you over the edge? Can it give you that additional information to take in that makes you say, oh, I want this more. And I think great album covers, my experiences and what I remember, particularly, in the 90s, going into CD stores and flipping through CDs, and there being a cover that you're just like drawn to it, and as you're picking between two, which one do I want? I want this one a little more for maybe not any more reason other than I like this cover better.
For sure. It's just really any other marketing. It can entice you, it can engage with you, it can speak to you. I also thought about movie posters. It's the same effect, except that a movie poster is pulling you into a movie experience versus a musical one, right?
That's also a good comparison. One more little aspect to them as a marketing propellant, the PR side of things, how the cover itself can get people talking. Just generally Google album cover. You'll find a lot of things like, here's a glimpse of this person's album cover. Somebody has an album cover that's controversial, or look what's happening on this album cover. So it's something that creates this sub-conversation and then promotes it in that other way. Gets people talking, especially in our internet-fueled world that can fuel sales in many cases.
Yeah, you referenced the 90s. Album covers had parental advisory explicit lyrics. That by itself caused people to buy the albums, when they
want it more because it has that.
Yeah, exactly. Because it was like a warning, right? Warning, this is something bad. And then immediately people were like, I need that right now.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so there's a lot of work being done on the cover side. A lot of heavy lifting, some you think about, some you don't, but it's the face of an album, essentially, and it does a lot for you.
Yeah. So do you think covers today still matter? In the age of iTunes and where you're not actually going to a physical store, you're just flipping through album art on your device or on your computer or whatever?
I think they might actually matter a little more. You may not get the whole physical experience of taking out your CDs. You kind of have the whole booklet and you could look at lyrics, or you could have more additions to the artwork within there like that. You might not get that whole thing, but particularly when you're scrolling online, something that grabs you, can really make a difference. As we have these new ways to, you can categorize or look through things a million different ways. With your physical store, you didn't have that. You just had your racks and things were organized how they were organized. Now I can look through, indie artists or new releases or whatever I want to. Maybe I'm just scrolling through real quick to see what's out there within these categories, and a good cover can grab you within those searches. So I think it might be more important in that way.
I agree with your argument there, but I think that it probably still mattered more then. Once upon a time, album cover art had to do a lot of the heavy lifting for album sales. Whereas like today, you can listen and sample music where you really couldn't do that when you went into a physical music shop, like a Quonset Hut or a Camelot Music in malls or whatever that was. The album art was the only thing that was marketing to you. Whereas like today, I could go into iTunes and I can listen to 3 or 4 of the songs maybe on that album. And that also helps me in my purchasing decision, where once upon a time, it was just that physical representation of what you were getting with that band, right? With that album. And the album art had to really speak to you at the time of purchase. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I remember even it was a big deal in the 90s that there was 1 or 2 music stores where you could actually listen. If somebody else wasn't listening at the time, they had like a couple places where you could actually listen to CDs before you bought them.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I guess, I was looking at it as the grab your attention. Mm-hmm. So that first step, I was thinking of the cover being more important in that aspect. But as far as that, set you over the edge thing, the weight of the cover, you're right, probably just isn't quite as important in the final decision as the actual music is. Today, that music is more accessible. You're right.
So what makes great album cover art to you? What's the criteria, so to speak?
I don't know that I have super strong criteria. I think it should do those things we mentioned, as grab your eyes, kind of excel interest, create conversations. Those are powerful, marketing things to do. Like all things, I think there's some that break those rules and are still effective. So I think the main thing is it just creates a vibe or idea that speaks to listeners or potential listeners, that says something about what you're going to get or what you want from that, and just speaks to you in that way. Going through and looking at a bunch of different album covers, I think it's not something with a simple formula where you can make it. There's a bunch of different approaches. There's your, here's a picture of the artist. Here's your more artfully done thing. Here's your random, more design-based thing. There's a bunch of different approaches, and they all can be done well and effectively depending on who the band is and what the music is and what they're trying to do at that specific moment in time. So I don't think there's like a super formula for the great album cover. I will say, as opposed to, other design or art forms, it's a little bit more messy, scattershot, what is good and what works. That's kind of how I experienced it. What do you think?
Like when I was younger, and I think it still holds true for me today, album covers that I thought were great were ones that were visually stunning. They had some sort of deeper meaning that caused me to sit and contemplate the meaning. You know what I mean? Like classic art masterpiece, something that I could always meditate while I'm listening to the music that's on the album. You know what I mean? So for me, that was always great album cover art. It was the experience of that, right? Even after the fact that I had the album, it was that experience of looking at the album art while I was listening to the music. If you were to ask me about the formula, I think it's funny. There's not really a good formula, but then again, you see bands that they use a formula. There are some bands that you look at any of their album covers because they have, let's say 10, 20, 30 albums. You could pick their album covers out, right?
That's a good point. Many bands, or groups have a thematic approach to their album cover art design.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that because to me, those bands, they get it. Their band is a business, and their business, like anything else, we talk about brands, having consistency in your brand is really crucial to success. And when you look at those bands and you see, over time, they've got this formula, they've got this thematic approach to their album covers, that band's got it together. And they probably had some longevity because because they've had more than one album. So that's always good.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a really good point, though. That's something I definitely picked up on. Particularly smart groups have done that. How that's kind of a branding tool, and kind of stamps, this is us. This is what we do. This is signature of us. And it's right there on the cover for you.
Yeah. So in a minute, everyone, we're going to drop the needle on our picks for the top 3 album covers of all time. That's what I said, of all time. But first, let's get a quick word from our sponsor.
Today's sponsor is Farmers Insurance. Insurance can be confusing, overwhelming, and time-consuming. At Hire Insurance Agency, we remove the guesswork and hassle, helping you protect what matters most. We offer a wide range of auto, home, business, and life insurance policies to help you meet your specific needs. Call 844-543-3463 or visit hireinsurance.com. That's HYRE insurance.com for more information.
So, Patrick, we got our top 3 album covers here. We each made a list. How'd you do it? What's your methodology? How did you come up with your picks?
Well, it's the science that I created myself. I don't know what that means, to be honest with you. But I started from my own music library, first of all. Similar to our best band name picks on a previous episode, there's just so much music out there. I needed to filter the pool pretty quickly so I didn't lose my mind. Not only is it from my own music library, I mean, this is music that I've listened to. So some level of bias, in my opinion. So that was number 1. And then I further filtered it down by picking some of the more classic album covers, stuff that was more iconic in my youth and mainstream for the most part, so that people could identify with them. You may not like that specific type of music, but you could probably picture the album cover art.
Yeah,
and,
you know it.
Yeah. So that was how I narrowed down and picked mine. How about you?
Pretty similar. I started from a different point. I went through and I looked at some of these best of lists. I'm thinking in my mind, let's try to be objective here. And I looked at some of these best of lists, which many very similar. Very similar when you look at the best of list. You're seeing a lot of the same things over and over again. And then I turned to my iTunes library. Honestly, I think this is a list that almost has to be personal. Just because your attachment to music is so personal, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where you can hear music and picture the album cover in your head, that's so specific to an individual. This is a favorite list. It's a best list, but it's top 3 for me and for you. And it's not going to fit for everybody. I will say this is harder than I thought it would be. I thought there'd be more immediate, like, oh yeah, I got to put that one. And I didn't totally feel that. I kind of made like a short list of these are really good ones. And like you, it had to be iconic and penetrated the mainstream in some way, because there could be a band that sold 3 copies of their album and they could have the most amazing album cover in the world. But us talking about it here isn't very interesting for people to listen to. Maybe it would be. Maybe they'd go find it and discover it. I have one on my list that's slightly off the beaten path, but for the most part, these are well-known mainstream albums that people would generally know, or even you're hearing about them and you could probably picture in your mind.
I would hope. If you don't, then just turn this off right now. Well, don't turn it off now.
Please don't ever tell people to just stop listening now, ever again.
Like the parental advisory explicit lyrics, stop listening. It's about to get really dirty.
It's going to get filthy. If you don't want to hear the filth, turn it off now. It's going to be bad. Your parents aren't going to like you listening to it.
So, with that said, my number 1 on the top 3 album covers is AC/DC, Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap. Didn't we just say it was going to get filthy, everybody? We just said that. Now, Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap album, certified 6 times platinum, both in Australia and the US, which means they sold at least 6 million copies. Here's the thing. This image, if you can picture it, these people on the cover, a businessman, a nurse/doctor, policeman, old lady, teenager in a tie holding a briefcase, black bars over mouths and eyes, standing in the parking lot of a motel looking at the viewer with the title Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap underneath them. It just sparks so many questions, which is why I think it works. So, number 1 on my list, AC/DC. What do you think?
I think that's a very good one. And that is a band in general that has some good album covers, but that's definitely one of the more interesting ones, especially what's going on there with that whole collection of people with black bars over their eyes. It's, what am I not seeing here? What's on the inside? I need to hear it.
And it's really those black bars, right, that make that even more interesting. It's like, if you saw their faces, I don't know if it would work the same. But because the black bars, it's this type of censorship. These people are obviously doing something bad, right? There's some dirty deeds happening here.
Well, it's the image mixed with the title, which I believe was one of your favorite album titles when we did that show, wasn't it?
It was, actually. Nah, I totally forgot about that.
It shows you how effective it is on both fronts, right?
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, this is a good lead into mine. We can tell we both started from the top of our iTunes library.
Because it's alphabetical order? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Mine is also from AC/DC, but not the same one.
Okay.
Mine is the album cover for AC/DC's Back in Black, which for me is a minimalist masterpiece. Only certain bands can pull off these type of things. Another one I think of is the Beatles' White Album. But what AC/DC's Back in Black is, it's basically all black, got the AC/DC logo with the lightning bolt, and then it just says Back in Black in gray. Almost like a tombstone, which made sense at the time it came out in 1980 because it was a mourning of sorts. This was the first album after their lead singer, Bon Scott, had died. So this was the first album they came out with after that. So it represented that mourning period. It had the title that fits perfectly with this. And it's a standout. You see that on the rack, that all black pops to you. Fits with the theme, fits with what was going on at the time, and would actually go on to become their biggest selling album. So it was obviously effective. That was one that definitely stood out to me. Just the minimalism there. If you have that in your collection, it pops out.
Yeah, something about minimalism. I do love the fact you picked an album that is so minimalist in its approach. But going in alphabetical order, Metallica, Master of Puppets is on my list. It is the third album by Metallica. It's the last album to feature bassist Cliff Burton, going back to something you said about the AC/DC Black album. Cliff Burton, who was the bassist, died in a bus accident in Sweden during the album's promotional tour. Like Dirty Deeds, it was certified 6 times platinum, so it was obviously very effective. This is just some interesting facts. Master of Puppets was deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant enough for preservation in the National Recording Registry by the United States Library of Congress in 2015, the first metal recording to do so. As for the cover, because that's what we're talking about, it's just visually striking. You know, the Metallica logo is hovering above a cemetery field of white crosses tethered to strings, sort of manipulated by a pair of hands in a blood-red sky. It sort of speaks to the title of the album, Master of Puppets. I always liked this one. It was actually an album that I had when I was younger. Going back to one of my criteria, it had me thinking about it as I was listening to the music, so...
Those red hands in the sky, very creepy, but definitely presents that metal image, right? Especially at the time, like if you were a metal band, there was a certain imagery you liked to present, dark and death-based imagery, you know? There was a lot of that.
Yeah.
To be a successful metal band, that like had to be part of your image a little bit.
Yeah, like a brand, you'd want to have imagery that speaks to your target audience, and people who like metal like this type of imagery, at least at the time. Maybe even still.
Yeah, probably. You don't see a lot of metal bands with them smiling on the front cover.
Smiling with their guitars and like, yay,
music.
Music makes me happy. So what's next on your list?
Next on my list, we're going all the way down to the R's. This one, back in 1991, got slapped with the old parental advisory, explicit lyrics that we love so much. And that is the Red Hot Chili Peppers' Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magic. This, to me, is one of the album covers I just remember the most. I don't know, it sticks in my mind the most. I think it's kind of iconic. From that time period, from the 90s, it was a very popular album, took the Chili Peppers into the mainstream. Signified this particular movement in time as we were moving into grunge and this new form of rock coming into the culture. So what you have here is you have something done different with the typical, faces of the band members on the cover. In this one, you have the faces arranged around the sides of the cover with this sort of tribal band tattoo look to it. In the middle with a rose in the center, and that's your pop of color. Some flowers around the outside, and then the name of the band around the outside in red, and the title of the album in gray. So you're working in this color scheme of white, black, gray, and red. The way the color is used, the way everything's arranged on it, represents the band and their funk rock styling and what was happening with music and where it was that moment in time.
Yeah, that's a great one. It's an album cover that grabs your attention for sure. This was also one that was on your best album name, I think. Was it not?
Oh, it was probably definitely mentioned. That's interesting. Overlap between the two, right?
Yeah, I do remember that. And white, gray, black, red, those are colors that work really well together. Very Swiss graphic design.
Also, the way the vines are coming out of their mouth.
Yeah, when it's coming out of their mouths, it's almost like serpent-esque tongues that are coming out of their mouth.
Yeah, definitely. You know, there's a simplicity to it, but also something that keeps you staring at it like, what exactly is going on here?
Yeah, I like that. So the last on my list is another classic, and it's from Pink Floyd, the album Animals. If you haven't seen it, it's a large factory with smokestacks, picturesque sky with clouds, and then a floating pig above the factory, which is, it's not clearly a pig in the album art unless you maybe knew that it was a pig. If you happen to know that it was a pig, why is that pig up there, you might ask yourself. Again, just a lot of things to process, and really stark contrasts in the image make for a very beautiful shot for this cover image, you know, but very cool album art. And one that made my list.
Yeah, that's a good one. And that surprised me in the way that not necessarily the Pink Floyd I would have thought you would have picked. I'm not surprised you picked a Pink Floyd because they actually have so many good album covers. The one that's on a lot of the best of list is Dark Side of the Moon.
While I do like the album cover art, that is not my favorite one. I know that it's best of and it's very iconic, but I just thought this one was more interesting, mainly because the mysteriousness of it's just a little bit out there, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good one, though. That's definitely a striking image and a good one, and a band that has a lot of them, actually, amongst my honorable mentions, of which I have many. Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here album, with the guy shaking hands with the guy on fire.
Yes, I like that one a lot. Yep.
I like that one a lot, too. I think that's a great, really, really interesting image on that one. So for my final one, I went into the aughts. 2003, The Strokes, and their album Room on Fire. Now, this one's the one I said, you know, I had one that was a little under the radar, still a fairly mainstream album, but some people might not have seen it, so you might have to Google it. But this album just, I don't know, when I thought of like great album covers, it stuck out to me because it's something that always stuck in my head. Like it's something I'd like to have on the wall. You know, it's something I'd like to get printed and have on the wall, that kind of thing. And when I looked it up, there's good reason for it. It's actually a piece of art from the 60s. It was created about the Civil War. That's what the artwork itself is supposed to represent. They obviously inserted the name of the band and the name of the album on there. But to me, mixed with the album, this just created such an interesting dynamic, you know, and it made me think about the album. And whenever I kind of listen to the album, I go to this image and, like you said, trying to dig in for deeper meaning. Obviously, there probably isn't much because it was created for a different reason, not created specifically for this album. That almost even speaks more to what this band is and what they were, at least in the beginning of the 2000s too, which was this cool, mysterious art garage rock band. They just kind of were like, let's play the music. We don't care about anything, blah, blah, blah. Their brand there, making you kind of look at things and wonder, what does that mean or what's that for? It's one of the ones I just thought was cool to have there. It made me like the band, it made me like the album just a little more. Even if I can't put my finger on exactly why, but it had that piece of art that goes with the album as opposed to the cover of the album.
Yeah, I did not remember that album, but I looked it up while we were talking here, and it's cool. It is a work of art, literally in this case, but I like it a lot. And, you know, this is what is so great about album art. Like you said earlier, there's no exact formula for what makes great album art, and that's sort of what art is, right? Art itself is subjective, it's personal, it's relative to the person. So what you find beautiful or interesting or unique, and I find interesting and unique, are going to be maybe two totally different things, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's why I said up front, anybody who's making this list, I find it hard to not make it personal. One, because you're never going to look at every album cover. And two, how could you ever disassociate how you feel about the music or about an album with how you look at that cover? You just almost can't do it.
Yeah. The one thing is I can personally disassociate myself a little bit from the music. So even if I don't necessarily listen to that music, I'm probably in the minority in terms of being able to appreciate the art.
Yeah, well, I think anybody can. But when you're like saying, pick your top three, I can look at your Pink Floyd choice and be like, oh, that's a great cover. I love it. But it's not going to crack my top three.
Yeah.
For reasons that are more personal than objective, I'd say.
Yeah, I see what you mean there. So honorable mentions, I'll throw out my honorable mentions because I'm sure you have 101 honorable mentions.
Had to whittle it down a lot.
Real quickly, I'll rattle these off. Nirvana's Nevermind album, the naked baby in the water looking like he's grasping for the dollar bill.
Who could forget it?
I think it's very iconic. Then a more recent band that has a lot of really great album art is Imagine Dragons, Evolve, Night Visions, Smoke and Mirrors. If you look up any of those, or you could find them on our website, they sort of harken back to the days of like Pink Floyd and what I was talking about before, where there's like this mysteriousness to the imagery. There's a lot more going on there than what's face value. That's what I gravitate towards when I'm looking at album art. So those are really cool. If you haven't seen them, check those out. Another one that's on my list, Janet Jackson. Janet. If you remember this one, this was the cropped version of a very controversial poster of the singer with someone behind her cupping her breasts. And I think that played a big part in why that album art was very successful.
It alludes to something.
Yes. Another is Maroon 5, Hands All Over, where there's a woman on a bed, can't see her whole body, but you could see all these hands, and they look like they're coming from behind her, like they're her hands, but there's too many. I thought that was super cool. It catches your eye, and you go, what's happening there? So I like that one. I'm trying to pick different genres of music, obviously, here. Muse, band that has a lot of really cool, interesting album art. Black Holes and Revelations, Drones, The Resistance. Very cool album covers. And then the last one, Wolfmother, Cosmic Egg. Great album cover. Bizarre and weird, but so is Cosmic Egg. I don't really know what that, it's just great band.
It shows you what a Cosmic Egg is.
Yeah, it's a lot of weird, interesting things happening in that album cover. So those were all ones that spoke to me while I was doing my research. How about you?
I'm impressed by the high number of honorable mentions you had.
I know, right? I was really going for a Shad Connolly level of honorable mentions there.
I like it. I like it a lot. It makes me not feel so bad because I was like, man, I could have 1,000 for this one.
It is. It's hard. And that's what you said at the beginning. It's like, I could go on forever just appreciating art and design,
There are just a lot of them, and it's hard to separate, but I will. I'll throw out some other honorables that stuck out to me that I considered for the list. Rage Against the Machine, their self-titled album, which is the guy lighting himself on fire, which I think is an actual photograph of a protester. The Roots, Things Fall Apart, has a striking, kind of terrifying image of a woman and man running in fear from the police. Led Zeppelin 1, which is The Blimp, and then Led Zeppelin, Houses of the Holy are both really, really good album covers. Led Zeppelin had some good album covers too. The 70s produced a lot of good album covers. Dr. Dre's The Chronic, just well-known, very popular album that kind of has, I think, an iconic album cover. You threw out Wolfmother, Cosmic Egg. I think Wolfmother's self-titled album, Wolfmother, which shows you what a Wolfmother is, I think, is also a really interesting one.
Yeah.
The Clash's London Calling. Jimi Hendrix, The Ultimate Experience, which just shows you Jimmy in all his glory and is another great one to have in your collection. Pearl Jam's 10 and Outkast's Aquemini, I think it's pronounced. Not sure if I'm getting that right, but has a really cool album cover too. So those are my honorables that I'll throw out here.
Nice.
Really quickly.
I may have had more honorable mentions than you. Did I? I don't know. I didn't count them.
I don't know. I did mine really fast, so I was trying to make it seem like less.
You did them like the Micro Machines guy from the 80s.
Yeah. Micro Machines.
You're like, what did he just say? Oh, he just named all of his favorite album covers.
Yeah, I went through my entire library, like AC/DC and Wu-Tang Clan.
Yeah, no, those are really good, man. And there's so much art to appreciate when it comes to music and album covers.
Popular, powerful, useful.
Yeah.
And on that note, let's get our final nugget of human wisdom. Human wisdom.
The human wisdom today comes from a band that I mentioned in my favorite cover list, Pink Floyd. And another very iconic album cover, Dark Side of the Moon, which Shad mentioned as one that was very popular online in the top album cover lists. From 1973, The Dark Side of the Moon became one of the best-selling albums of all time and is in the top 25 of a list of best-selling albums in the United States. In 1987, an interview with Carl Dallas in the book Pink Floyd, Bricks in the Wall, Roger Waters commented on the meaning behind it. "I don't see it as a riddle," he said. "The album uses the sun and the moon as symbols, the light and the dark, the good and the bad, the life force as opposed to the death force. I think it's a very simple statement saying that all the good things life can offer are there for us to grasp, but that the influence of some dark force in our natures prevents us from seizing them. The song addresses the listener and says that if you, the listener, are affected by that force, and if that force is a worry to you, well, I feel exactly the same too." The line, "I'll see you on the dark side of the moon," is me speaking to the listener saying, I know you have these bad feelings and impulses because I do too. And one of the ways I can make direct contact with you is to share with you the fact that I feel bad sometimes. I particularly like the meaning expressed in this commentary because it's exactly what we're always preaching to businesses and brands. Number one, communicating with people in a very real way. And number two, speaking human to those people when you're communicating with them. Even though Pink Floyd's lyrics can be and are interpreted in many different ways, just like many songs in the world, it's always a goal of any communication effort, whether that be a song, an album cover, or your marketing message, to connect with people on a very basic level. And I think that's what this album cover does, and I think that that's what this commentary signifies.
Great stuff. Great piece of human wisdom there, which I think hits on something we didn't explicitly mention. You know, we talked about it as a marketing tool, but the cover, your connective tissue between the music that's inside the album and the person buying the album, right? Come see what's in here and how it can impact you or how it can affect you.
Yeah, a lot of times the artist will give the designer the music to listen to while they're designing it, so that they can get a feeling for the music, and then that comes out and it showcases itself through the art. Like you said, that connective tissue between what's in the music and what the viewer's seeing, right?
Yeah, great stuff there. Definitely some great wisdom to walk away with here.
We like to give good wisdom. Well, that's it for today's episode, everyone. You can find current and past episodes of the podcast on speakinghuman.com. You can also find and listen to the podcast on Podbean and Speaking Human, or really anywhere fine podcasts are available.
Tweet us your pick for favorite album cover of all time using the hashtag #GreatestAlbumCover. We're at speaking_human on Twitter. That's at speaking_human on Twitter. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Speaking Human. Catch you then, humans.
Speaking Human.